for a long, long time, we were just very responsive to the customer, and whatever the customer wanted or needed, we would attempt to jump through those hoops. And that can be successful in terms of growing top line. But as we've worked with you on some of these things, if you start measuring, it doesn't necessarily all contribute to the bottom line.
Welcome to the Power of Respect podcast with Charlie Leichtweis, author of the book, The Power of Respect in Business. Charlie is one of America's foremost authorities on respect and leadership development. And now, here's Charlie.
Hello, I'm Charlie Leichtweis. Welcome to another episode of the Power of Respect podcast. Today we are talking about the evolution of legacy in family businesses. Our guest today has a significant amount of experience in that area, having been involved with his family business for quite some time. My guest today is Jim Phillip, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Phillip's Flowers. Phillip's Flowers operates a retail and wholesale floral business in Chicago's western suburbs. It was founded in 1923 and is now in its third generation of family ownership, including some fourth generation folks becoming involved in the business. They, in fact, will be celebrating their 100th anniversary in business in 2023, which is a significant accomplishment. Jim has joined the company in 1976 and has served in leadership roles along with other family members since 1979. Jim also serves on various boards of directors, and he's actively involved in floral industry leadership groups as well as his community leadership groups. Jim is married to his wife, Gwen. They reside in Hinsdale, Illinois, and they have 3 adult children. Welcome, Jim. Great to be with you today.
Well, thank you, Charlie. It's great to join you and to be reconnecting with you after working together several years ago.
Yes, same here. The subject of legacy means a lot of different things to different people. So maybe we'll just start with, what does your family legacy mean to you and your family, and maybe how it has evolved over time?
Well, that's a good point because I'm not sure if my definition of legacy fits yours or your listeners, but I'd say, Charlie, that our family has a sense of legacy going back to our founder, whose name was also Jim Phillip. We've always called him Senior. He was born in Chicago from parents of Middle European roots, and he was the eldest of 7 children. And when his father suddenly died, he had to leave school in the 8th grade in order to support his mother and younger siblings. So he got a taste of life and work early. He tried all sorts of jobs, including delivery of flowers by streetcar for a busy Chicago florist. And he did higher paying jobs, including the railroad, delivering milk, that sort of thing. But he kept getting drawn back to the flower business because he liked it at least as much as anything else. And eventually he opened a small rented shop in Cicero, Illinois, which was a suburb on the west side of Chicago. Some people may have heard that name Cicero because gangster Al Capone used to hang out there with his men. And it was actually a hotel nearby Grandpa's flower shop.
Wow.
So our family has kind of a standing joke that Grandpa took pre-need flower orders before the term was actually coined by the funeral industry, orders from Al's men. But of course, that's all speculation on our part.
That's a different sort of legacy.
Yeah. But as you can imagine, Grandpa's business bloomed, and soon his wife Helen joined him. She had been a bookkeeper kind of across the street at the Western Electric plant, which became AT&T, Bell Companies, Ma Bell. That plant made telephones, and she was a bookkeeper there, but Grandpa's business needed help, not only bookkeeping, but answering the phone, taking telephone orders. And they had 3 children. The business prospered, and the kids kind of grew up running around in the little greenhouse behind the shop. But Grandpa was kind of a classic model of a first-generation entrepreneur. So I don't know if that's your idea of legacy, but I can certainly build on that if you want, Charlie.
Well, as a matter of fact, I think it's a great example of how it starts. And and how the situations people find themselves in evolve into what they want to do for a living. And when they find a passion like your grandfather did for that kind of business, it becomes part of the family legacy. So I think when we start with that as the initial entrepreneurial person, and then we move on to the next generation, I guess, if you could describe that as your company began to evolve.
Well, I suppose it's not that unusual if you read the literature about the progression in family businesses. It often starts with kind of a craftsman entrepreneur. Grandpa was definitely the craftsman who was not highly educated, but he was driven by the drive to put food on the table, support his growing family, put him through school, and he was successful meeting his customers' wants and needs, and he even was able to put his 3 kids through private school at Northwestern University, and they all went on to have very successful families and business careers. I think maybe another factor that you often find common in multi-generation family businesses like ours is that there's a set of core values that are important to keep the family together, to solidify the priorities of life. In our case, it was kind of the basic core value of a Judeo-Christian faith. A faith in the God who created us, who revealed himself through biblical truth and, gives people a way to live successfully, and revealed himself in historical figure of Jesus Christ. So I think our faith might have been a underlying factor that kind of keep us together in unified values, as well as just, in our business, it's a manual, hands-on business. We're in the shop working together. Sometimes at the busiest times are times when other families are off from work, celebrating family time alone at the holidays. But that's when our business peaks, at holidays like Christmas, Valentine's, Mother's Day, Thanksgiving, Easter. Those are all peak demand times for us.
Right. Well, when I think of the term governance, which a lot of family businesses find to be a word they're not excited about if they think about it in terms of people telling them what to do. Governance to me is basically the decision-making process, whatever it may be. Maybe you could comment on reflecting back on your grandfather's decision-making process to the extent that and then evolving that as you went through to the next generation and the next generation up to you and your cousins and brother.
Well, again, I'm not sure we have any unique approach to that. We're probably more typical than atypical, but if you read some of the literature on family business, and I'm sure you have and many of your listeners have, you'd find that our experience parallels that. When a business starts at the founder's level, it's very dominated by one person's vision, one person's decisions. It's very autocratic, and I'm sure my grandfather was that way. And yet when you get into the second generation and maybe a son or a daughter or siblings get involved, you get multiple opinions, multiple people whose name is on the door, and there has to be a lot more deference to each other. Otherwise, you end up killing each other over minor things. So depending on your heritage, your background, I think that evolves over time, especially as the next generation shows some capability, and they probably get more decision-making conferred to them by earning it. Sometimes they have to seize it, sometimes they simply earn it, and the earlier generation is happy to release the grip. But I think that's the way it happened in our business. When my father finished his military service and finished his degree in business at Northwestern University, he came into the business. It was a single shop operation. It was a busy shop, so it could support another family member. But my father had an opportunity soon thereafter where a new shopping center was being built west of Cicero in LaGrange Park, or LaGrange, Illinois. So he got excited about that. It was a way to maybe do his own thing, make some of his own decisions, show his father that he deserved some key role in the business. And his father was very against it. As you can imagine, the founder thought that was the dumbest thing in the world. Why would you separate your resources, divide them, take on more overhead, more rent, more utilities? But somehow or other, Dad persisted. He opened that shop, barely starved that first year with his new wife, my mother. But it was successful eventually, and in fact, so successful that the landlord said, "You've outgrown this one space shop, you need a larger one." And he didn't have a larger one to offer, so he did a build-to-suit and an outlot on the property. Beautiful large store, very impressive for that day and age. And we've been operating that shop ever since. It's still our longest existing shop, because the original shop in Cicero we closed when the neighborhood changed. And LaGrange has always been a key in our portfolio, not the only one now, but it was a successful transition of decision making and governance. And pretty soon, I remember my grandfather transferred to the LaGrange Park shop. He worked in the basement filling flower orders, and he didn't have any more say so, at least not visible to me. He probably had an opinion, but he kept it to himself, and he became an employee when my father and his younger brother, my uncle, kind of took over and started that governance in the next gen. Now, the next gen governance gets even more interesting.
Oh, I'll bet. But let me go back for just a second. Do you recall any of the stories from your dad regarding the interaction between him and his dad relative to some of these decisions? Did he ever relay any stories about how that went? Initially his dad said, "I think it's dumb to do that," but somehow he persisted. Was there any conversations or any meetings of the mind that happened to make that actually go through?
Well, I don't remember any details, but just knowing their personalities, I mentioned that we have kind of Central European roots, Northern European roots. So we're maybe not as emotional as some other ethnicities. We don't necessarily wear our feelings on our cuffs. So I'm sure they had some discussions, maybe some somewhat tense discussions, but they always arrived at a collaborative solution together. And I think we've carried that on through third and fourth generations. In fact, sometimes to our detriment. Sometimes it's good to have it out and have a good fight and then make up and go on.
Right. No, that's right. So then, the governance, decision making, and succession planning, getting into the next generation. How did that come about? So this is now from your dad to you, basically, and your relatives, cousins, and siblings.
Well, yes. In our family architecture, there's maybe a little bit unusual. There was about I think a 13-year gap between my father's age, the eldest of three siblings, and my uncle's age, the youngest. So it's almost like a half generation later that my uncle came in 1961. That was another interesting opportunity where regional malls were starting to open, and a very prestigious regional mall was opening further west in Oak Brook, Illinois, and there was an opportunity to open a shop there. And again, my grandfather and my father even had some misgivings about whether that was very wise. You'd have to park a long distance away from the flower shop. You'd be carrying a perishable item out to the parking lot. It could freeze. The rent was extremely high for what a florist could afford. All these negative reasons, but my uncle kind of pushed forward, saying he was going to manage that shop. He felt confident that he could do it. And fortunately, a lot of Fortune 500 offices chose Oak Brook as their Chicago area office. So in addition to the walk around shoppers, there was a lot of corporate work available for a florist. And we were the only one in town, so that was very successful. I'm sure there was plenty of generational differences between Grandpa, Dad, and now my uncle, the three involved. But they somehow worked that out. Each had their own skill set and passions, and it was a growing business. And oftentimes what you find in the second generation I've read, I don't know if your experience is the same, Charlie, but first generation is the craftsmen, second generation are the promoters. And that's definitely typical of Russ and my dad. They got systems that worked, and then they were ready to replicate them and grow them.
It sounds like this is a great story for audience. It sounds like the folks had intuition and knowledge of the business and how to grow it. Was there actually a formal strategic planning session, or these just evolved over conversations? I can't imagine. No, I know Russ at least a little bit. Can't imagine him sitting down and trying to create, a book of what the strategy should be versus his instincts on how to grow. How did that work?
I'm sure it was not formal. It was probably just seizing opportunities that presented themselves. That's probably informal, but it's not necessarily wrong. In fact, there's been some good books come out recently that say that all this formal strategic planning that companies tend to do should be thrown out the window, because those that are most sensitive to opportunities that fall into their laps tend to be the most successful. So it was not formal. And about that time, I was going along the formal path in getting an engineering degree at Stanford, and then went on to get a master's in business at Northwestern. And I saw this informal, kind of haphazard business growing like topsy. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I would never want to work there, but I did a case study on it in my concluding year at Northwestern. And the case study was about a potential diversification into the installation and maintenance of tropical green plants in commercial office buildings and that sort of setting. It turned like it was a growing opportunity, one that our family should look into. And long story short, I ended up hopping into this informal business thinking, well, I've got all the answers and I can rationalize this haphazard mess. And I learned very quickly that I didn't have any answers. And although they teach you all the theory in business school and engineering, you don't have any leadership basics. You have to learn that by trial and error.
No, absolutely. And leadership development is a key element that isn't really taught in school per se, in any experiential way. So within your business, I know there's several key areas, the funeral area, weddings and special events, everyday flowers and holidays, sort of, at least as I remember, those are some of the major breakdowns of the segments of your marketplace. How did they get developed in terms of, it sounds like some of those evolved as well through this intuition in terms of which category to be in?
Yeah, I think intuition might be part of it, but I think for a long, long time, we were just very responsive to the customer, and whatever the customer wanted or needed, we would attempt to jump through those hoops. And that can be successful in terms of growing top line. But as we've worked with you on some of these things, if you start measuring, it doesn't necessarily all contribute to the bottom line. And what we were experiencing is what I've often called breaking even higher and higher. So we kept growing, but we just kept not putting profits on the bottom line. And I think that's typically what you find when many family businesses evolve into the third generation, is there has to be some organization, some rationalization, some systems and controls put in place. And maybe it's not as exciting and surprising as it could be, but I think that's when you start to have to make tough choices about what businesses are really important to us, what do we want to grow, what don't we want to put more resources into. So we're really in that stage now as I'm trying to groom my cousin Derek, who's kind of like a half generation behind me and my brothers, and my son, another James. We gave him a different initial to keep all of our names straight. But so we have the blessing of some younger generation continuity, but it's not easy. And there's a lot of pressures just because of the momentum. We've always been the do-all, can-do florist. And when you have to start turning your back on some of that, it's painful.
Right. So so fast forwarding then to today, with the folks you mentioned, the G3 folks, your uncle, your brothers, and then of course G4. How do decisions get made today? Are all those generations involved? Are those two essential generations involved in the decision making process? How does that work today?
Well, that's evolved a bit over time too. One thing that I can give credit to that goes way back into probably around 1980, before my brothers were even involved and G4, but my father and I went to a conference in Cleveland, Ohio, put on by Leon Danko, who's kind of seen by many as maybe the father or the guru of family business. And one of Danko's points at that time was it's beneficial to have an independent, some directors on your board that aren't working in the family business. So around 1980, Dad and I started putting together a few outside directors, and much to our surprise, we were able to get a few guys that had a lot more experience and bigger businesses than we had, and they were willing to serve for really what was a pittance at the time, just a few $100s per quarterly meeting. And that outside wisdom was helpful. We still have a board of directors today. Right now, it's still a little bit lopsided. It's more family members than independent outside directors, but we've had a rotation of directors on the outside over the years, and that has been a good sounding board. They don't ultimately tell us what to do because we family shareholders have the vote, so to speak, but they bring some rationality, some experience, some contact resources to us. If we say, hey, we're thinking about a profit sharing plan or a 401k or whatever, who do you recommend? And they bring some good wisdom to the table that would take us a long time to find otherwise. So that board helps, gives us some accountability within the family. And I think we have had to more formalize the structure. We have a more formalized organization chart now with various people reporting to different titles and so forth. Yeah, we all wear a number of hats in the family. And I don't know if that answers your question, but at one time we even had a shared office of CEO. So all three of us brothers shared the CEO office. And we found over the years that that wasn't very effective, that, we had to have unanimity before we could move off a dime. And so our outside board members said, this isn't working. You guys can't seem to make a decision. And so I became the CEO, got one brother who's president, another brother who's chief administrative officer, kind of the legal and risk management and so forth. And that seems to be a little bit more effective, yet we don't have all the answers.
Right. No, that's so true. But no, that did answer the question very much so. And as you look forward, with G4 being involved, there's two people, your son and Russ's son are the two G4s in the business today, I believe, right?
Well, Russ's son is actually still G3, but he's kind of a G3 and a half just because of that gap in age. Yeah. My son is the only 4G member, and he's in his mid to later 30s now. So he's not just fresh out of school, very experienced. He does all of our flower buying. And I've got two daughters, one of whom's married to a pastor and very happily situated in Tennessee. Another who's working for big tech, probably making several times what a florist could ever dream to make. Started out with Google and then got recruited away by Meta. She's newly engaged, so what her future is, we don't know. If they downsize, maybe she'd be a great asset to the family business. But outside of our two daughters, who aren't in the Chicago area, there are 5 nephews. Don and Baxter have 3 and 2 kids each, but all 5 of those guys are very bright, very successful, talented, pursuing their own careers out of town. And I don't know that they've all said it this way, but I've gotten the spirit from those nephews that they're not sure they ever want to work as hard as Dad did. That has been an issue. We're in a service business, It's one that's perishable, so that's probably more work than the average business, replacing our inventory every week. It's on demand, a little like pizza or something like that. You don't plan funeral flowers very much in advance unless you're Al Capone. So, we're working hardest on demand with a perishable product with prices that are going up and down based on the weather and horticultural markets. And it's not a high paying business. People aren't attracted to our retail service business because it's a get rich quick scheme. So I don't degrade those opinions at all by my nephews that they don't want to work as hard as their father did. And maybe that's our current and next generation's challenge is how do you streamline this further so that it can start to have the systems in place that it's not a 7-day-a-week hand-holding type business.
No, those are all great points as you think about how companies go through succession planning and transitions. And one thing that occurs to me is that the other generations that are in the family that are not directly involved in the business and may not be going forward, they still will at some point in time have an ownership stake, perhaps, or understanding the value of the business relative to ownership or equity potentially. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth for them, but so the question is developing them and engaging them in those generations to understand what the business is, what it does, what the communities it serves, what the employees it serves are. That's important from an ownership standpoint, not just do they come into management or sit on the board. How do you guys looking at that? Has there been efforts or consideration to start at least engagement through education or exposure rather than recruitment for some of these generational folks?
That's a good question, and that may be one of our weaknesses to date that we need to consider seriously going forward. Is the conventional literature wisdom says that successful multi-generation family businesses have business governance in place, and then there's family governance. And typically family governance is called a family council. And we don't have a family council per se. I guess the the wisdom there is it would be good to have someone serve as the chair of the family council who is a good bridge builder, brings family together, can plan family events, some educational opportunities, and there's some organization and structure to that. Whether a family member is actively involved or not, whether they own shares in the family business or not, it brings the family together so that when you get into your fourth and fifth generations, you're not all splintered all over the country and you lose touch. So that's one of our to-do lists, as is, I think more immediate might even be business leadership and ownership succession.
Mm-hmm.
And that succession obviously has taken place fairly well through the years up to this point in time, but we may now have a dwindling number of candidates in the immediate family. And so the question becomes, do you streamline the business, maybe sell off certain branches that makes it easier to manage, or do you figure out a way to actively recruit more family members? Do you think about selling to your employees in an employee stock ownership plan so it becomes employee owned and not just limited to one family? We're looking at all of those options.
Sure, absolutely. And in addition to that, the idea that outsiders or professional managers are brought in but still governed through the family governance process that overlaps with the corporate governance process as a possibility.
Yeah, I think although we haven't been intentional about the family governance side, we've been fortunate in that many of us enjoy some of the same things when we do find time to make time off or downtime. And so several of us have second homes up in Wisconsin where we'll get together and enjoy some recreation, and that tends to bring the kids and the grandkids together. It's not as structured maybe as a family council. There aren't educational sessions that we've held yet, but I think just recreating together has been helpful, and we probably need to do more of that.
Yeah, no doubt. And so relative to even deciding what to do with the business, sometimes the legacy goes on when a company is sold and the wealth is then pivoted to something else as part of their legacy. So there's a lot of options available, regardless of what the evolution brings for your business. Well, this has certainly been very helpful, I think, to our audience, and I really appreciate your time. Relative to decision making in the area of leadership development, is there any specifics on that you want to add to how you're evolving the business and or the family?
Well, I'm spending a lot of time giving that thought. Been going to a lot of webinars and workshops on transitions in family business and developing the next generation and so forth. But I don't have any silver bullets. I wish I did. It's one of these things that we just need to be working on every day, every week. And at age 70, I certainly don't have a lot of mileage left on my tire treads, and we need to be intentional about it.
Sure. No, absolutely. Well, again, I think this conversation is going to resonate with our readership or audience as well, both for the book coming out and the podcast. In terms of any other comments on how you folks do conflict resolution within the business? I know it's evolved based on your description, but any advice you have for other family businesses relative to conflict resolution as you look forward?
Well, I'd say the main one I already suggested is to have some independent advisors or directors that you can refer to and that stay on for enough years that they have a sense of long-term continuity. I would say develop some practices that fit your pattern, whether it's formal meetings, informal meetings. I have a lunch meeting with the president, my brother, every week, and I don't often have a formal agenda, but it's a way of forcing us to be communicating well. We're all in the same office together, so that helps. We do have monthly meetings with all 6 of us family owners, and we try to bring up updates, what's going on in each of our areas of responsibility. So that may work for us and not for someone else, but I'm sure every business can find its own patterns of keeping together and staying aligned so that you're not independent silos.
I think that's great advice. It's a flexible journey that people are on, so they need to be flexible in deciding what works for them. I want to thank Jim Phillip for being with us today, and I especially want to thank you, the listening audience, to this episode of The Power of Respect. If you like what you heard today, please consider sharing the podcast and visit our website at expertsinhow.com. A quick reminder, if you'd like to read my book, The Power of Respect in Business, it's available on Amazon, and I will also be coming out soon with a book, The Power of Legacy in Family Business. Thanks again for listening, and remember, respect builds trust, trust builds relationships, and relationships are the key to leadership.
This has been the Power of Respect podcast with Charlie Leichtweis, author of the book, The Power of Respect in Business. To listen to more episodes and to learn about Charlie's leadership development programs, visit his website, expertsinhow.com.